Hi, I'm a Homo sapiens.
Would you like to be a homodeus in future?
Of course, everybody would. I wouldn't. Then I think either you're lying or you are a fool, and I think latter is more possible. Hi, I'm a Homo sapiens from planet Earth. I call myself Alpha, and I'm a Homo sapiens from the parallel Earth, and he calls me Beta. Today we're talking about Homodeus by Yuval Noah Harari. This is the second part of this book. In the first part, we talked about how Homo sapiens conquered the world and set an agenda for themselves. Agenda of happiness, immortality, and ultimately divinity, becoming Homodeus. In this part, we'll talk about how Homo sapiens gives meaning to the world and ultimately how Homo sapiens loses control over their own created world. As we saw in the earlier part, animals live in dual reality. Objective reality like trees, rocks, rivers, and subjective reality like fears, joys, and desires. But for sapiens, apart from these two, we have one more layer of reality, intersubjective, like stories about money, gods, nations, corporations, and as history unfolded, the writer says these intersubjective realities have dominated our lives, and the 21st century will make these intersubjective realities even stronger. In order to understand them, we must first learn how they gained so much power in the first place. Individual human abilities have remained the same from Stone Age up till now. If a time traveler kidnaps a Stone Age baby and brings her into today's world, she will grow up normally in today's world. But writer says the power of our fictional stories have grown a lot from the Stone Age to today and will grow even more in the coming time. We have been telling stories about spirits and fairies and demons since the cognitive revolution some 70,000 years ago. But for a long time, they remained local stories with a limited audience because we lived in a small tribal groups. By the time of the agricultural revolution, when we started building bigger communities, our stories also became more powerful with larger audiences believing in them. Agricultural societies believed in gods. They built big temples for their gods, held festivities and made sacrifices for their gods, offered lands and presents to gods. Those temples were not mere centers of worship but also political and economic hubs. Of course, gods, being imaginary, were not running the business of temples. Humans were. And to run this business, they needed to keep records, hence the invention of writing and money. With the invention of writing and money came that dreaded human idea, bureaucracy. In the name of living deity, Pharaoh, his bureaucrats were managing his business. Writer says Pharaoh was a brand, just like today's brands like Elvis Presley, Madonna, and Justin Bieber. Hence, when Pharaoh, being mere mortal, died, was replaced by another, so the brand could continue and so could the business. Just like Elvis Presley is dead, but the brand Elvis is still in business. Invention of writing thus made humans to organize entire societies in an algorithmic fashion. Writer says supreme organizational skills along with thousands of literate bureaucrats made buildings of pyramids and reservoirs and big dams possible in Egypt in spite of lacking wheels and iron tools solely on muscle power. Invention of writing led to selected literate few, meaning bureaucrats, gathering more power over ordinary masses. These literate bureaucrats could change the fate of large illiterate masses with just a stroke of their stylus. Political power lied with Pharaoh, organization or government, and that power structure was run mostly by bureaucrats, and they decided the fate of masses. Power of stories made humans believe in gods and ideas of nation and organization, and that belief was sustained by bureaucrats and priests who kept these accounts of gods, organizations, and governments, and in return exploited the large illiterate working population. Gradually, these bureaucrats, these administrators became so powerful that they started to decide what the reality would be for the larger population through documentation, and they realized they could change reality, thus exploiting the illiterate population and subjecting them to immense suffering. Two examples of power of bureaucracy. First, in 1940, when Nazis overran France, a Portuguese consul in Bordeaux named Aristides de Sousa Mendes granted visas to thousands of Jewish for Portugal, thus saving their lives from Nazis. He did it against the official orders, and though he was fired for insubordination, visas that he granted were honored. Thus, a piece of paper stamped and signed by a bureaucrat was more important to officials than actual human beings. A bureaucrat actually did something good in this story with his bureaucratic power. Another example of how bureaucracy can affect the actual human reality is Mao Zedong's Great Leap Forward. Mao gave targets of surplus agricultural produce to finance his industrial and military ambitions. Every person under his bureaucratic hierarchy put exaggerated numbers to make his superior happy. Believing those bureaucratic reports of excess produce, the government exported the produce in return for weapons and machinery. Result was the largest famine in history and the death of millions of Chinese. In short, communist China's bureaucracy caused the famine. Millions die because of bureaucracy. Obviously, people will overthrow them, right? No. Same thing that bureaucrats use to exploit masses. The power of stories can also be used to appease them through propaganda. Propaganda is one more tool in the hands of bureaucrats to control the masses and stop them revolting against them. Now, if the bureaucracy causes human crises because of their fallacious descriptions of reality, why don't the bureaucrats depict reality accurately in their writing? Answer is that over the time, bureaucrats became too powerful and self-important to admit their own mistakes and instead force the reality to match their description of reality. Africa is an example. Modern borders of Africa disregard river lines, mountain ranges, and trade routes. These borders split historical and economic zones unnecessarily and ignore local ethnic and religious identities. That's because these borders were drawn by European bureaucrats who never set foot in Africa. Colonial European powers divided Africa amongst themselves as they wished and later on kept those borders drawn by bureaucrats to avoid any further disputes. Writer says the same thing happened with the Holy Scriptures. Priests and scribes used writing to document God's property. But as bureaucracy gained power, they also gained authority. And so along with God's property, they also started to write God's deeds, commandments, and secrets. And this was supposed to be the reality as described by God and must be followed. The question here is, surely people would realize that description in those holy books doesn't match with reality, right? Actually, humans have a tendency to believe in fiction more than reality. Large masses can only be made to do something if they believe in the importance of fictional stories. Currency notes and degree certificates are just papers, but with immense importance because of fictions created around them. These papers can change an individual person's reality. Religions, nations, and corporations are all fictitious entities that wield great power over ordinary people because they are created with a strong sense of fictions around them. They subject ordinary people to uphold their glorified narrative through exploitation and finally claim themselves as success, disregarding the suffering of those who worked for that same glorified success. Here, writer suggests that we ask a simple question to separate fiction from reality. Just ask, can it suffer? If a temple of God is burned, can God suffer? If a nation is defeated in war by another nation, can the nation suffer? If a corporation goes bankrupt, can a corporation suffer? Answer to all is no. It's people who suffer in trying to uphold the glory of these fictitious entities. We created these entities to serve us. How come we find ourselves serving them? Although fictions cause suffering, they are vital for our civilization to function. But writers suggest we should attach less significance to fictions and keep in our minds that they are just fictions and we shouldn't suffer ourselves to uphold them. Writer says these old fictions of God and religion served us well until now. But today, in the modern world, they are not as important to us. Instead, with the advent of science, we have created new myths in place of God and religion, and science helps us bolster those new myths. We might not believe in God today, but we believe with the help of advances in medical science and advanced understanding of our biology that we can make our bodies immortal and thus become God ourselves. A myth of immortality that we want to create into reality. Writer's point is our tendency to create myths does not go away. It is just that our myths change. And today, science helps us bolster those myths. Religion is a tool invented by man to preserve social order and accomplish things with large-scale cooperation. If that is the definition of religion, then in today's world, humanism is new religion. And like any religion, humanism also has its offshoots. Liberal humanism, socialist humanism, and evolutionary humanism. And belief systems of these offshoots of humanism are rooted in objective science. Thus, science actually helps us bolster our beliefs in these new fictions. These are not any better than old religions that the human mind created for their own convenience. Here, writer also wants to clarify the difference between organized religion and spiritual journey. Organized religions have rules that need to be followed. They have answers to all the questions of human minds. In contrast, spiritual journey is an individual search for answers to questions like, who am I? What is life? What should I do with my life? And such a spiritual journey has nothing to do with religion. In fact, an individual who asks such questions rebels against organized religion. Someone like Buddha, Jesus, or Martin Luther. If such individuals manage to find answers to their questions, unfortunately, over the time, they end up forming a creed around them as well. People make a religion out of those answers as well, because that is just human tendency to have faith in firm rules and make belief systems out of them. Who is the odd couple in this chapter? It's science and religion. Writer claims science and religion are intertwined like a married couple. They do not understand each other and constantly argue, but they also cannot do without each other. Science needs religion and religion needs science. Science needs religion because there are some moral and ethical questions that science cannot answer, and there are a few religious facts that we need science to clarify. On question of abortion, science might tell you exactly when a nervous system develops in a baby and when it is safe to end that life, but you need religion to answer if it is okay to end that life. Science cannot answer that ethical question. And religion has this tendency to make ethical statements that science cannot verify. Statements like, human life is sacred, human body possesses a soul. There is no way science can verify these statements, but there are a few smart people who believe science can give us ethical guides and we don't really need religion anymore in today's world. But according to writer, this is not accurate, and he gives an example. Three Gorges Dam in China. It's a marvel of science, technology and engineering. It provides cheap electricity to 1 billion Chinese, but because of this dam, indigenous dolphin went extinct. Writer asks if the happiness of 1 billion Chinese who have cheap electricity is worth the pain and suffering of extinction of dolphins. Answer to this question is difficult because we don't know yet what consciousness is, how to quantitatively measure the happiness of humans and how to measure suffering of other species and how to equate them like a mathematical equation to make things clear. Science cannot resolve this dilemma. Writer says there is a conflict between religion and science. Although both claim to seek the truth, in reality, religion seeks social order and science seeks power over nature. So they have different objectives, hence the conflict. But there is one particular religion in the modern world, namely humanism, that actually uses science to bolster its claims. Writer further claims that humanism and science had some commonality between them up till now, but he predicts the future when there will be disintegration between these two, that there will be postmodern religions that science will help bolster and humanism will disintegrate. What is the modern covenant? Writer says it's the deal modernity has made to gain power over nature in return of meaning. To elaborate, he says, up till now, every religion believed human beings are a part of greater cosmic plan that gave meaning to their lives in return of loss of power. A belief that there are greater forces and we are just play acting the parts assigned to us. Any misfortunes like diseases, famines, and wars are part of that greater plan and we are helpless. This has been a dominant belief. Modernity has upturned that. Modernity helped us eradicate diseases, famines, and wars, and thus helped us gain power over our lives. Modernity says there is no greater power over us. We are just insignificant creatures on a tiny planet in an indifferent universe, and we can, in fact, acquire all the power for ourselves. And thus, in return, modernity stripped us of all the meanings that earlier grand narratives gave to our lives. In spite of this, modernity has an escape clause for us. It has surreptitiously put a sense of meaning into our lives. How? In pre-modern era, human economic growth was stagnant because nobody believed that the future would be better. Modernity made us trust our future and hence a sense of investment in our future. This collective trust in our future growth helped us grow economically. We could invest in our future and thus gain power. This economic growth is the only new religion of the modern world that we all follow even today. There might be little disagreement as to how to preach this new religion, namely communism, capitalism, nationalism, and various other ideologies argue over the practice of this religion. But ultimately, end goal is same, economic growth. Because that is the only heaven of this new religion that we all aspire for. Writer says, like every religion, this new religion of economic growth also puts us constantly into a moral dilemma. But the answer for those dilemmas is always stuff. Buy stuff for all your problems and you'll feel better about your moral dilemmas. One of the prominent ways to create and buy stuff is free market capitalism. And capitalism needs perpetual growth in order to keep running for us to create and buy new stuff. Capitalism is a wheel of perpetual growth, and that wheel needs constant fuel of invention and investment. Invent new things for people to buy and invest your gains to invent new things, and so on. This is how capitalism works. Invent and invest. One more thing that capitalism needs apart from invention and investment is resources. And we only have finite natural resources to capitalize on them. So science has to invent new ways to maximize our resources. Pre-scientific belief was that we have only two resources, raw material and energy. With the advent of science, we now have third resource, knowledge. Along with raw material and energy, we now have knowledge that we can utilize and keep growing. Only difference is raw material and energy are exhaustible resources. The more you use, the less you have for the next generation. But for knowledge, the more you use, the more you get. And your future generations, in fact, grow rich in knowledge. For example, today I invest my money to find new oil fields. I find oil field, I use it, and I get rich. But my future generations will have less of oil. But if I invest today in solar energy and invent new ways to create energy, my future generations will improve upon my inventions and will have even better ways to create more energy. Modernity gave power to Homo sapiens as we conquered wars, famines, and diseases, but modernity also tells us that God is dead. And with God, any cosmic plan for us is gone, and hence any sense of meaning to our lives is gone. But as we said earlier, modernity found an escape clause here. Modernity says human beings can have power and can find meaning too, and that sense of meaning lies within themselves. That is humanism, a new religion of the modern world. Humanism proclaims human feelings as sacred. It is an important guiding force for their lives and can give meaning to their lives. This is humanism that we all follow today. All civilized Homo sapiens right now follow this religion, including both of us and including all of you. Humanism is a de facto religion of today's civilized world.
Yes. Humanism commands us to derive meaning, not just for our lives, but for entire world, entire existence, through our feelings. That is the new humanist creed. Look for meaning within yourself.
Yeah, perhaps that's what I follow. I always say, know thyself, so I can understand everything around me. That's why I say I'm a humanist. I didn't even know I was a humanist until I read this book. I believe I was indoctrinated since my childhood to believe in this creed. My thinking was influenced by humanist literature over the
Yes.
years. Perhaps everybody today living peacefully and happily in a civilized world is a humanist. I can
Yes.
safely say that.
Yeah, sure. Me too. Now, when we make human feelings as the authority to derive sense of meaning from instead of some cosmic plan or God or old religion, we have a problem. And the problem is human feelings are always fickle. We never feel the same way about a person, an object, a situation, a political system, or even an ideology all the time. Our feelings change constantly towards everything and everyone, and hence the real problem is how to derive a sense of meaning from such fickle feelings towards everything. If we go by this creed of individual feelings as guide to all spheres of life, then in a political system, a voter knows best. In free market economy, a consumer is a king. In arts, beauty lies in the eyes of a beholder, and whatever he she thinks and feels is best. And such arbitrariness of an individual voter and consumer creates all the confusion in the modern world because not everybody is capable of making smart choices. Thus, individual voters might be irrational and end up making bad choices and elect a dictator to power. Individual customers might be just passive consumers and end up creating bad market strategies and increasing ecological degradation and creating suffering for animals. What is art for one person might be utter trash for another, and so on. There is an inherent conflict in this creed. Humanists gradually realized the irrationality of feelings, and hence, to endow an individual with knowledge, they invented a formula. And formula is knowledge equals experiences times sensitivity. This is the new formula for knowledge to grant validity to one's feelings and experiences and have a sense of authority within oneself. In humanist novels, a naive protagonist goes through various life experiences, observes those experiences through a sensitive heart, and ends up becoming knowledgeable and wise at the end. This is the narrative replete in a plethora of humanist novels and movies these days. This is all just a humanistic ideal of an individual human feeling being important. Just like every old religion, this new religion of humanism has also created its own subsects: liberal humanism, socialist humanism, and evolutionary humanism. We can see from afar that liberal humanism and socialist humanisms are in direct conflict with each other. Whereas liberal humanism believes in individual as a source of all meaning and authority and power, socialist humanism dismisses this idea in favor of collectivism. Socialist humanism believes that we must consider the socio-economic situation of all members as a unit and not just an individual. Socialist humanists discourage individuals' self-exploration, such as know thyself, something I personally believe in. According to them, I am wrong. I should not go deep inside me, but I should go out and meet people, form unity with them over some common goal of collective well-being. These ideals obviously are appealing to a socialist humanist, but for an individual like me, it doesn't work for me personally. Being a loner, liberal humanism suits my temperament. An introvert like me in a socialist society will always rebel against the collective. In return, socialist society will feel that liberal society is crazy, always being so self-centric. One more difference between these two ideologies is in liberal humanism, the consumer is king and voter knows best. In socialist humanism, Socialist Party knows best and trade union knows best. While these two branches of humanism have conflict between them, the third branch of humanism, evolutionary humanism, does not shy away from conflict. In fact, it thrives in conflict as in evolution. Survival of the fittest. Evolutionary humanism believes that the strongest should preside over the weak. Nazi Party was believer of this ideology. Strongest nation should rule the weak nations. Obviously, war was the outcome of this belief. While liberal humanists believe beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder and all art has equal merit and should be cherished, socialist humanists believe there is no such thing as art for art's sake. Art should always serve some social purpose. It shouldn't just be an individual's expression of inner being. Evolutionary humanism goes beyond this argument and says there is such a thing as superior art and inferior art, that classical Western music is far superior than contemporary popular music or any tribal music. The 20th century is the evidence of these three factions of humanism fighting each other for supremacy. Liberal humanists, Allied forces fighting evolutionary humanist Nazis, socialist humanists USSR fighting Nazis, and then Cold War between socialist Russia and liberal USA. By the end of the 20th century, liberal humanism was triumphant, and so were democracy, individualism, and free market economy, which is a status quo. As of today, there is no alternative to liberal humanism anywhere in the world, and we all follow that. The writer speculates alternatives will come only from the technological community, and tomorrow's technologies will define new kinds of religions that probably we will all follow. As we talked earlier, technology will have more impact on human lives and change our lives in more ways than religion can. Religion is like an itch on collective human consciousness that flares up every now and then. Even during 19th century industrial world, there were several religious revivalist movements, and every movement believed their superiority would be established in the near future. In reality, those nations that engaged in these movements and looked back into old scriptures for meaning were conquered and ruled and exploited by more industrial nations with the help of new technology. And according to writer, this will continue to be the trend in the future, that only technology will give rise to new religions, kind of a techno-religions. After reading this part of this book, I have thought about my own ideals of know thyself. I have realized that I have made my own selfhood the authority of my life. My feelings and thinking guide my life. I have always felt a kind of conflict inside me when I gave importance to my fickle feelings. Hence, over the time, I have learned to live in self-denial towards my feelings. Whatever I feel, I try to rationalize my feelings. I give too much thought to my feelings and then decide the right course of action based on my reason, not my feelings. I still claim myself to be a liberal humanist, but I use more reason in my life to guide my life, and I usually ignore my feelings. I can safely say I am not an irrational voter, nor am I a passive consumer. I will say I am a rational observer. Okay, good to know. Regardless of what you say, I believe deep down you are an evolutionary humanist. You hate people because you find them less intelligent than you, less accomplished in other human faculties than you. That's not why I hate people. I hate people because they are less empathetic and less curious and more selfish and preoccupied with their own benefits. I hate people because they refuse to use their reason and live by their fickle feelings. I hate people because they refuse to develop their individualism and live by a kind of a herd mentality. I hate people because they are irrational voters and passive consumers and not rational observers. You just proved my point. You hate people because you think you are superior, because you can rationalize and develop empathy and curiosity and explore your individualism, and others cannot pursue these human values. That makes me a more liberal humanist, not an evolutionary humanist, because my misanthropy is a rational misanthropy, not an irrational and violent hatred. Anyway, this part certainly was full of ideas that we both enjoyed reading, and yes, I am also a liberal humanist just like him. Although I don't aspire for know thyself, I do believe that individualism is a value worth pursuing, that there is no alternative to, at least for two now, democracy and free market. This concludes the second part of this book. In the third and concluding part, we'll talk about how Homo sapiens loses control. So that's all for now. Bye. Do you seriously believe in know thyself?
Of course, with all my heart and mind. Why? Why do you ask?
No reason. Reading the last part of this book will be fun.